Good evening. Welcome to the Illinois State Bar Association's program known as Illinois Law. My name is Nancy McKenna and I'm your moderator this evening. I'd like to introduce you to our esteemed panel. I have Susan Brazis from the law offices of Christine Gardner in Rockford, Illinois. Susan practices general civil practice with some real estate and traffic issues. Next to Susan is Judge Edna Turkington Victoria. Judge Victoria has been a Circuit Court of Cook County judge for 14 years. Previous to that, Judge Victoria has been on the panel with Harold Washington. She was the first female attorney on the Rules Committee for the City of Chicago. And next to Judge Turkington, I have Sarah Dottie, who practices immigration law and removal defense in Rockford, Illinois as well. Welcome, panelists. It's nice to have you on.
Thank you.
The program today for our viewers is the consequence of a guilty plea. And I'd like to start with Susan. Susan, what generally is a guilty plea?
A guilty plea is a statement made by someone who's been charged with an offense, and that could be a criminal offense ranging from a petty offense all the way up to a felony, and also can include a traffic offense. So when the person enters a guilty plea, they might be doing that by signing the back of their traffic ticket where they got stopped for speeding. They might be standing up in front of a judge and verbally saying, yes, I'm pleading guilty, and or they might be signing a written plea of guilty. But in all of those cases, what the person is doing is admitting that they are guilty of that particular offense or violation.
And what are some general consequences of entering a guilty plea, say, for example, to a petty offense, such as a traffic violation?
The offenses could be very minimal. If the person has no prior traffic violations, and if in the next year or two they don't have any further ones, it may just be something that is made note of in the court records, which nowadays are in many counties accessible to the public online, and it may have very minimal consequences. However, to in other situations there may be very harsh consequences on the person's employment, either their current employment or even their prospects of looking for employment. And in particular, it's important for a person to know what are their obligations to disclose either to their current employer or even say they've already filled out a job application and have not yet accepted or been offered a position. If a question had been asked of them at the time as to whether they had been convicted of a criminal offense of any kind, and they answered no, that will be something important to look carefully at to understand whether they should disclose to their prospective employer or their current employer that indeed they have been convicted. Because what people may not understand is when they plead guilty, that's their own statement, and what happens from that statement is that the judge, the court, will then enter a conviction. And that's something that is a very serious legal consequence.
Judge Edna, what happens when someone enters a guilty plea from the court's perspective?
What do you mean, what happens?
Well, they're either represented by an attorney or perhaps they're not. Let's say, for an example, someone is not represented by an attorney. How would the court handle that if the individual wanted to enter a guilty plea, let's say for a non-petty offense, a misdemeanor offense? Well, if you as the judge, how would you approach that?
Well, the same as if they have a lawyer, because the questions go to the defendant, not to the lawyer. And what's very important is if it's an offense where they have a right to a jury, 6 or, well, and always 12 people, then you have to tell them, are you sure that you first want to give up the right to a jury trial? If you do you know what a jury trial is? And I ask them that, and if they say, well, yes, I said, well, do you understand that means 12 people that would determine your guilt or innocence and that you're giving up that right? Do you also understand that by signing this jury waiver, you're giving up the right to have a trial of any kind? Once they establish that, then I want to know, are they doing it voluntarily? Have any promises been made to them? Have any threats been made to them? And if that answer is no, then you want to know, are you doing this voluntarily of your own free will? After all of that, then I still want to know if there is a factual basis for the plea. Then after all of that is done, then I'm also going to admonish them that if they are an immigrant, you understand that by entering a plea of guilty, it might affect your status.
By status?
You might be deported, you may not be naturalized. That's what we mean by status.
That's a good point, Judge Edna. Sarah, you practice in the immigration area. Have you had cases with individuals that have entered guilty pleas and it had consequences to their immigration status?
Absolutely. Many people don't understand that even if you're a lawful permanent resident of the United States,
What's a lawful permanent resident?
someone who has a green card,
Okay, thank you.
a green
Thank
card
you.
holder.
Thank you.
People who have green cards are subject to deportation if they're convicted of certain crimes.
What type of crimes?
Theft offenses, forgery,
Are those usually misdemeanors?
yes,
Okay.
or even felonies,
Okay.
weapons offenses, and controlled substance offenses.
Okay. And when the individual, say they come to you, do you ever advise, is it, in some situations, is it advisable for them to enter a guilty plea?
It may not be. If the consequence of entering the guilty plea is that they're going to be clearly deportable, they may choose to take their chances at trial. If the result is going to be the same, if they're found guilty at trial or if they enter a guilty plea, either way they're going to be deportable.
Is there any specific case law in Illinois that addresses the issue of removing a legal resident or deporting them
Well, the Supreme
when
Court,
they enter a guilty plea?
the U.S. Supreme Court last March handed down a decision, Padilla v. Kentucky, which states that criminal defense attorneys have an affirmative duty to tell their non-citizen clients if by entering a plea of guilty to certain offenses that will make them clearly deportable. And if their defense attorney fails to advise them, then they might have grounds to file a motion to vacate that conviction, that guilty plea.
Oh. Are there any corresponding laws to that U.S. Supreme Court ruling in Illinois?
Well, obviously it's the Supreme Court, so
Right.
it trumps
Right.
any Illinois state laws, but the judge might have more of an idea about admonishments in the court.
Yes, I do happen to have a case with me. And that case was decided by the Supreme Court of Illinois December 17th, 2009, and that's de Villar. And in that case, the court did not admonish the defendant that by entering a plea of guilty, that it might affect his status in the United States. And the ruling by the Illinois Supreme Court was that the appellate court will only look at that admonishment as being part of the reason for the defendant to have a basis to withdraw the plea of guilty. That's
Okay.
just one factor.
Okay.
But what counsel was talking about, it's mandatory that the attorney tell the defendant about the possibility that they could be deported. And if not, it's ineffective counsel. So you see there's a difference. The burden is not on the judge in that case, it's with the defense counsel. However, I think as overall practice, the judges in Illinois always give the admonishment.
Thank you, Judge Edna. Now, going back to you, Susan, about let's take a petty offense like a traffic violation. How would most people don't go to an attorney for a traffic violation? So they may, unbeknownst to them, plead guilty, pay the fine, and not realize that it would have ramifications to their immigration status.
That is a common problem, and not just for people with the immigration issues out there, but just to anyone who's a driver. They may think, oh, I don't have time.
Right.
I'm just going to sign the back of this traffic ticket and pay the fine, and I'll go on my way. And of course, the immigration issue and what that could mean for their status to legally remain in the U.S. is very critical. But even for persons without that worry, there are potentially very serious consequences to their ability to drive, namely if they are currently under some other traffic period of time, such as what we call court supervision. They may put that status in jeopardy by having another traffic offense conviction within that period of time. So it could have harsh consequences down the road that they may not realize at the time.
And just to clarify, traffic violations won't make someone deportable.
Oh, that's good to know. That's good to know. But it may have ramifications for other issues like employment. Thank you. We're going to take a quick break.